and nor does simply transferring detainees to Afghan authorities absolve us of our responsibility. Is that your understanding?
Yes, but that responsibility is not absolute.
How so?
Well, I mean, again, you'd have to get some international lawyers to help you with that. But there are the transfer having taken place in good faith with a full understanding that the responsibility of the Afghan authorities would be properly exercised. If something is subsequently done, the Canadian authorities can't be held responsible if a year later the Afghan authorities go and do something crazy. I mean, no criminal code system operates, to my knowledge, in that respect. I mean, but you'd have to get a lawyer to tell you that. I mean, what we do is we're responsible if, in the face of, if I understand, of knowledge of what you do. But you can't be responsible for what you don't know about. It's not an absolute responsibility. There's no such thing.
Let me make the argument that is made sometimes by legal scholars, that if you know, or you ought to have known, because there's a positive duty to find out, if you know or you ought to have known, or you knew or you ought to have known that there was a substantial risk of torture and you continue to transfer, if something happens to a prisoner or prisoners, we are responsible as a country despite the fact of transfer. That's my understanding of the law. Wow. And just because it happened after the fact does not absolve us. I'm making that argument because the argument made by some colleagues from the government has been that you ought to have known because there were reports in the public domain in 2005. Madam Alexiak argued that there was sufficient evidence in the human rights reports that she wrote. I'm saying this because I want to give you a chance to respond. Done?
We'll move back to Mr. Deckard, please. I got to get used to this 5-minute, not the 7-minute round. If you want to answer very quickly, okay, Mr. Graham.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I mean, the honourable member, and I don't want to get into a legal argument with him, has totally jumbled up what international lawyers make the difference between the law of war and the law in war. There's personal responsibility under the Geneva Conventions for individuals who they do certain things under the law of war. The law of war, which governs the responsibility of countries, is a different matter. Wars of aggression, human rights. So I honestly, I don't accept what the member said in terms of a country's responsibility, because what he's talking about under the under the War Crimes Act, as I understand it, is a war crime of individuals, and therefore would have to be proved in a court of law that they knew or ought to have known and failed to exercise their responsibility. But there are greater international lawyers than myself around, and they can maybe help the House with that.
Thank you.